Straight Shift with the Car Chick, the podcast that's all about cars, buying, selling, fixing, and driving, and sometimes pretty fast if you're the Car Chick. Now, here she is.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Straight Shift. For those of you who have been listening to the last few podcasts, you'll know that I have been in the process of revamping my film and podcasting studio. So the sound quality today for this podcast should be a lot better. I have the walls in my studio completely wallpapered in acoustic sound dampening foam. And I've attached them to the walls using command strips so that I wouldn't destroy the drywall. And I literally think I have used over 500 command strips. The next step is to do the same thing to the ceiling so that I have a kind of a perfect little whisper room here so that the sound quality for these podcasts will only get better and better going forward because, you guys as my listeners deserve the best. In the spirit of Valentine's Day, I wanted to talk about how men and women approach car buying very differently. When I started this company, about 15 years ago, my goal was specifically to help women buy cars. Not that I was discriminating, but I knew that women tended to feel more uncomfortable with the whole car buying process than men do, despite the fact that women buy 62% of all new cars sold in the US, and they're responsible for 85% of all car buying decisions. Yet so many women still feel like they hate the haggling and they don't like the way they're treated by the dealers. I swear, I still hear women come to me and saying, "Oh, this guy was like, let me show you the vanity mirror." My favorite, "Honey, when can your husband come in to talk about a deal with me?" I kid you not. These are not things that, were heard 20 years ago. I hear these things almost every week from women who have been out car shopping. So it's still been going on. But from day one, when I started this company, half my clients have been men. So that challenged a lot of my initial assumptions about how men and women approach the car buying process. And being a very analytical person, when I am challenged or I'm looking at, okay, why is this happening? I like to dig deep and look at the actual hard market data. And I did this when I started the company, and I revisit that data every year to see how the trends are changing so that I can stay on top of it and understanding what people are looking for. But I like hard numbers. And what I found when I was really looking at the differences between how women and men approach the whole car buying process, I found it very eye-opening, both, in good ways and scary ways in some cases. So, in honor of this holiday, I'd like to share my insights about the gender gap in car buying. Let's kind of do a men versus women, not a competition, but just looking at the data of what types of vehicles are they buying, what features are most important to them, and how do they approach the whole car shopping process, and how much do they end up paying, and what are kind of the strengths and challenges that each gender faces that are similar and different from each other. And this information is not a criticism of either gender. It's really not men versus women, nor am I claiming that either gender approaches things better or worse than the other. This is just data. I got it compiled by, Edmunds.com, JD Powers, the various car manufacturers, all their sales data that they compile, as well as what's available, inside the industry. Plus, there have been surveys done by a lot of the big marketing groups of both men and women car buyers to get, kind of the more soft data and their feelings on things across the US. So let's start with how men and women approach the overall car buying process. Women spend on average 17 weeks just researching cars before they make a buying decision. That is a lot of time. And this doesn't include the actual negotiating and the logistics of buying the vehicle. This is just the research process ahead of time to help them figure out what they want. Now, men also spend a lot of time. It's slightly less, but it's still 15 weeks. And that trend has changed a lot over the past 20 years as more and more information has become available to the end car shopper in the market. Thank you, Internet. The good news is there is a ton of information out there. The bad news is there's a ton of information out there and it's a lot to wade through. And it's real easy for people to get kind of bogged down in that research and be a little paralyzed in the process. 1 in 5 men go into the car buying process already knowing exactly what vehicle they want, even down to the technical details like engine size and transmission and drivetrain types, suspension specs, all those nitty gritty numbers that tend to be a little more important to men than most women. Women, on the other hand, are twice as likely to still be undecided on exactly what vehicle they want, even after they do a lot of that research. Part of that is, they're a little overwhelmed by a lot of the information because as women, we do tend to be researchers. And once we start digging in, we can easily go down the rabbit hole. And when there's a lot of conflicting information out there and information from sources that you may or may not trust, we can get ourselves into a research paralysis. I sometimes find myself doing that in other industries, when I'm researching things like microwaves and sound equipment. So that is the downside of having all that information out there. 58% of men have said that they feel confident both in the choice that they made of a vehicle and in their ability to negotiate a deal when it comes to buying a new car. Now, this doesn't mean necessarily that they're right. I have found that even some of the most confident men still make a lot of the common mistakes in car buying that everybody else makes. They just go into it more confidently. That's just true of anybody, and I always say, unless you've worked in the car business, you really don't understand the car business. And so a lot of people think they're going in very confident and know what they're doing with negotiating, but they're only hitting the tip of the iceberg in how the overall car deal works because they just don't know as much as the dealers do. But at least they go into it confidently. Women, on the other hand, 38% feel confident going into the buying process. This confidence gap between the genders goes back to a lot of what I talked about back in, I think it was episode 30, when I talked with a special guest, a social science expert and co-author of the book Women Don't Ask, Sarah LeShaver. If you haven't heard that episode yet and you're really interested in understanding, why women tend to struggle more in negotiations, not just in the automotive industry, but across all industries, go back and listen to that because the research that Sarah and her co-author, Linda Babcock, who's an economist, did when writing this book is startling and very, very eye-opening about, us as individuals as well as society overall. Interestingly, neither gender is particularly confident when buying a used car, and both men and women tend to be concerned about buying a lemon. But most of this data refers to people shopping for new cars because that we just have more data in the industry around that. Fortunately, the confidence gap that I was talking about between men feeling good going into the process versus women feeling good going into it, that's narrowing with the younger generations. They compiled a lot of data specifically among the millennial population. And millennial men and women seem to feel equally confident or equally not confident, depending on the situation, but about going into the car buying process. And I think that's a sign that we are doing a better job of teaching our daughters, to value themselves and how to negotiate. And they're building those skills that, I'm a Gen Xer, my generation, and certainly the baby boomers before me and even my mom's generation, we didn't have as much of that growing up as the younger women are now, which is great that we're moving in that direction. And also, it's interesting that millennial men also have a different perspective. They are much more likely than older guys to believe that women are equally capable and often more logical than men during the car buying process. 60% of the millennial guys said that women, in fact, are actually the stronger negotiators, at least in the women that they know. And I see this both in the younger car shoppers that I work with, as well as the younger men and women that I see working at the car dealerships in sales and management positions. And I tend to prefer working with women in the car business, partly to support other women in the car business, and partly because, quite frankly, working with the women sometimes is easier because we think the same way and we're on the same wavelength, and I can get deals done faster working with the female managers than the male managers usually. But I've got several younger men that have started working at the dealerships over the past few years who have just been outstanding. And I see the way that they treat both me and my female clients is very, very different than, kind of the traditional car salesman that, yeah, unfortunately, there's still a whole lot of those guys out there. But they're more conscientious. They go into it with the attitude of that there's no difference. The respect level is equal whether they're talking to a male customer or a female customer. And I got one young guy, and I'll just give him a shout out. His name's Ian, and he works at one of the Toyota stores here in town. And young guy, he's still in his 20s, but he's fantastic. And the first time I met him, I was doing a test drive with one of my clients who's an older lady. And I don't normally do test drives with my clients personally, but this lady, she's older, she's not as comfortable at the dealerships, but she's also been a friend of mine for, about 15 years. So, I take care of her, and she's one of my neighbors. So we showed up at the Toyota store to test drive the little CHR, and it was July. There's nothing like test driving cars in July in the South. You really test out the air conditioning. But when we got to the dealership, not only did he have the car pulled up and ready to go for us at our appointment time, which you wouldn't think, would be rocket science or supposed to do that, but it's amazing how many don't. He not only had the car waiting for us, but he had already had the air conditioning running for 10 minutes. So the car would be cool for when we got into it because it was July, and he wanted to make sure that we were comfortable. And he was so patient with my older client who had a million questions and patiently explained the technology. And I was just so impressed with his customer service skills and the experience that he created for us that I end up buying a lot of cars from him now because he always consistently does a good job and treats all of my clients, but especially my female clients, with a deep level of respect that unfortunately is still rare in the business. So thanks, Ian. I appreciate you. Keep up the good work. The car business, unfortunately, is still dominated by just a lot of older guys. It's just they started the business and they're still in it. These are a lot of baby boomers, some of the first Gen Xers. And a lot of them, unfortunately, still have some more antiquated views of the capabilities and the role of women. And that's why women still continue to have these experiences of, hey, honey, can I show you the vanity mirror? But I also see a lot of that attitude, for women who are working in the industry. I'm a member of several Facebook groups that are dedicated to women who work in the automotive industry at dealerships and retail, automotive shops, body shops, etc. And kind of across the board in the industry, women are really, really struggling with these, sexist, old-fashioned, pain in the butt attitudes from a lot of these guys. And I know we deal with that in a lot of industries, and certainly it's not all the guys out there, but it's enough that it is a common topic of conversation, and it's just due to the outdated ideas. But we still have to deal with the discrimination and sometimes downright harassment, not just as consumers, but as employees in the industry. And that's why I'm planning to license my business model so that I can give women who want a career in the car business but don't have to put up with some of the challenges that are posed by dealership life, both in terms of the working environment, but also the hours. And people ask me if dealers treat me differently because I'm a woman with what I do. And the answer to that is both yes and no. When I first started the company, I was fortunate to have a business partner who had been working in the car business here in Charlotte since she was 15 years old. And her father had worked in the business before her. So she'd grown up in the car business. And she was one of the first female general managers of a dealership in the entire country. So I was able to kind of piggyback on her reputation and the respect that she had spent, nearly 30 years gaining in the industry. But yeah, I still had to really, really prove myself, especially to a lot of the older guys in the business. And it was just a matter of being better, knowing as much about cars as they did, knowing the car buying process, using all of the right jargon. And I think it's why I embraced the brand of the car chick that, kind of happened accidentally. as much as I did. And, that becoming an industry expert has given me that respect, but it has been a little bit challenging. Now I have, most of the dealers pretty well trained, and the good ones are the ones that I've developed long-term relationships with. So I don't tend to experience those situations anymore, but they do occasionally still come up. I was buying a Subaru for one of my female clients up in the New Jersey area. And, she also works in a male dominant industry. She's in the construction business. And so she's used to dealing with this. And she's always driven trucks and Jeeps and vehicles that can handle driving across construction sites. And she's moved up in her career into management now. And she decided it was time to get herself a fun car that she's always wanted. And she's one of my three pedal divas, so she knows how to drive stick. But when you live in New Jersey and you want a sports car with three pedals that can also handle the snow, your choices are pretty much the Subaru, or the Subaru. So I was trying to set her up on a test drive of a WRX. And I called the Subaru store closest to where she lived because they had a WRX on the lot. And I get this guy. And, I told him we want to test drive the WRX. And he's like, oh, we don't allow test drives of the WRX. I was like, what? How do you expect people to make a car buying decision if you will not let them test drive the car? And he said, well, WRX owners, they just, when they buy one, they don't want to have any miles on the car, so we don't let people test drive them. Okay, I get that. It's a bit ridiculous, and that's fine with your enthusiasts, but it's not really a good way to attract new Subaru WRX enthusiasts. And so he started asking me a bunch of weird questions, like, well, what is your client driving now? I'm like, well, she had a truck, but unfortunately, that was hit in an accident and was totaled, but, she doesn't need a truck anymore, and so she wants a fun car. And he's like, well, you do know that the WRX is a sports car, right? And it takes premium gas. Are you sure that's what you want to put your client in? you know, it was all I could do not to just laugh out loud. And so, I kind of like, no, really? I had no idea that was a sports car. I'm just a girl. I let him have it. And then, I said, you know what? Never mind. We're not doing business with you. There's 5 other Subaru stores in town. Click. So, yeah, I had a fun time reaching out to his general manager 2 weeks later to tell him exactly why he had lost the deal and why we had bought that WRX at the dealership across town. So, sometimes I even still get those attitudes, but fortunately, they are changing, and, I'm seeing more confidence from women, both inside the industry and as consumers. I'm going to take a really quick break. I know I've kind of been ranting a little bit, but when we come back, I'm going to get back to the facts, and we're going to look at what kind of cars are they looking at? What are their priorities, men versus women? And what are they paying for these cars? Is there a difference? So I'll be right back after this. Do you hate car shopping? Do you worry about being taken advantage of or about finding the right car at a great price? Buying a car can be a frustrating and time-consuming experience. But what if you could get a great deal without having to do a ton of research, without having to haggle, and without the fear of buying a lemon? You can. As your personal car shopper, the Car Chick will help you pick the perfect car based on your unique lifestyle, budget, and personality. She'll handle all of the legwork and negotiating for you. All you have to do is sign the papers and take the keys. It's that easy. To learn how the Car Chick can save you time, money, and hassle on your next car purchase, give us a call at 704-248-8706. That's 704-248-8706. Or visit us on the web at thecarchick.com.
The Car Chick is back for more Straight Shift.
Welcome back to the Straight Shift. We are talking about the gender gap in the car buying process and how men and women approach the process differently, and what are they looking at? What are they looking for in vehicles? How do they do their research? We said that women tend to do more research than men, but once all the research is done, Men take an average of 63 days to actually make the purchase and close that deal. Women take a little bit longer. They take about 75 days because they tend to be a little more detail oriented and a little more diligent in making sure that everything ticks and ties and all the numbers are right on that deal. Part of it also is the difference we talked about in confidence. The women aren't quite as confident on average in that deal, and so they take a little bit more time with it to make sure that they've done their diligence. And quite frankly, women tend to be really busy because we have to juggle professional and personal life a little bit more than our male counterparts. So it just takes us a little longer to get things done. Interestingly, society often criticizes women for being too emotional and making emotional decisions. But the data in the automotive industry shows that it's men who tend to let their emotions influence their car buying decisions. They tend to care more about how the car makes them feel, and they're more image conscious than most women. So they're looking at things like, the car's exterior styling. How does it look? What is the interior layout and quality? Does it feel luxurious? Does it look cool? As well as all the technology in the vehicle. Men tend to like the music features like the Pandora integration, as well as the smartphone technology like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. Men also tend to like vehicles that are more flashy or rugged looking. Now, whether they actually plan to make use of any performance or ruggedness capabilities in that vehicle, most don't, but they want it to look really cool. Hence, men tend to lean towards the European luxury brands like BMW and Audi, or the American trucks and SUVs like the Ford F-150, the Chevy Silverado, and anything with the term Jeep in front of it. Specific brands that are predominantly bought by men versus women include some of the luxury, the super well exotic brands like Ferrari, Maserati, Porsche. Although every Porsche that I have ever purchased in the past 16 years has been for a woman client, but that's another story. GMC, Ford, and Chevy also tend to be purchased more by men than by women. And the sales data also shows that men tend to favor flashier colors to go along with these flashier cars like red, even orange or yellow, which I find interesting because I don't see that with my clients at all. Most of my male clients tend to stick to like black, gray, and silver. They're kind of the standard. Sometimes dark blue depending on the car. But my clients tend to be a little bit different than the overall industry average anyway. I just found that interesting that men want the flashier colors. That's kind of funny. Women, on the other hand, they tend to value safety and reliability over anything else. How is this vehicle going to hold up over time? How much is it going to cost to maintain? Because they don't want to deal with those hassles. And the cost to them, both in their time, their money, and their aggravation, as well as a potential risk to them personally, if they get stranded on the side of the road because their car breaks down, that has a higher impact to them. And so they're very, very focused on avoiding those situations, hence, wanting to have reliable vehicles. That means that they tend to lean towards the Asian car brands like Toyota, Subaru, Honda, Hyundai. Interesting, women also tend to buy more minis than men. I don't suppose that's a big surprise. And, hello, I drive Maggie. But they buy more Kias and Nissans than men tend to. In terms of the features specifically that they're looking at in the vehicles, women like those safety features. They want blind spot monitoring. They want backup cameras, the new driver safety aids like collision mitigation technology. Women know that we often face more distractions in the car because we're the ones that usually have the kids in the car, and kids are distracting. So they like to know that the vehicle has at least some extra technology to give them more help and even a backup, a fail safe or a safety net if those distractions get the better of them in traffic. It happens. And really, these features have been popular with both male and female car buyers since they came out about 3 years ago. In terms of colors, women tend to favor more traditional and neutral colors in cars or blues. And anything with an interior that's going to hide stains and dirt and goldfish crackers really well. Although, interestingly, the most popular color that I have found among my female clients, at least in the last couple of years, is white. Usually paired with one of the lighter interiors, but we live in the South, so a black interior in the South is a good way to cook your butt in the summer. So we tend to stray towards the lighter, less butt frying interior colors. Now, these stats are, of course, these are industry data averages. They certainly don't apply to everyone. I've got plenty of women clients who drive either badass trucks or three pedal sports cars. And I have an equal number of male clients who drive, very sensible, reliable SUVs. I've even got a couple of guys that are very proud stay at home dads that can rock a minivan like nobody's business. Now, my clients, of course, are a different subset of the overall industry. So, my personal data that I have tracked and that I experience is very skewed from what the industry averages are because I'm attracting a clientele that's a little more homogeneous in terms of their financial profiles and their priorities and their lifestyles. So, those are my ideal target market clients, and they tend to all be more conscientious. They tend to all care more about reliability and be more cost conscious than just looking at all car buyers across the industry. That's just, the target market that I target and end up being ideal clients for me, and I end up being an ideal solution for them. Now, these stats also refer to vehicles that people are buying for themselves. So these priorities and preferences are when they're talking about buying a vehicle for themselves. Interestingly, when men with families are considering purchasing a vehicle that their wife will drive and that their kids will be hauled around in, their priorities suddenly do this 180. And safety and utility all of a sudden shoot up to the top of their priority list. Especially I found with new fathers, and this is the first kid, or their kids are still really young, they're really paranoid about safety, which is great. I'm glad that they're concerned about the well-being of their family. But sometimes it's kind of funny to see their level of paranoia when they do a lot of research and they start, spouting all these safety statistics and crash test ratings. They have researched all that information to death. But I find that they often equate vehicle safety with the actual size of the vehicle, and they want to put their spouse and children in a tank, something that they think will be completely indestructible in an accident and therefore keep their loved ones safe. And I have to educate them that that's not necessarily true. And putting them in a huge tank of a vehicle is not necessarily going to make them safer. And in many ways, it could make them less safe. Huge SUVs are a whole lot harder to control. And when you have to take evasive action and handle an emergency situation or slam on the brakes or you hit water in a wet, slippery pavement, those vehicles are not going to handle well. The reason tanks are tanks is that they work really well going in a straight line, on a predictable surface. Big SUVs, if it's harder to control, then the driver's more likely to get into an accident. If they do have to take evasive action, those vehicles are top heavy and they're way more likely to roll over in an accident than a smaller SUV or a minivan or even a larger sedan or a wagon. So I have to talk these safety conscious new fathers out of the tank and make them realize that, your family's going to be safer, in a smaller mid-size SUV that the driver feels comfortable driving, feels like he or she can control it better, and still has really good crash test ratings and a boatload of airbags. But you want to feel confident in maneuvering that vehicle. But again, it's nice to know that fathers want to keep their families safe just as much as the moms do. So let's talk about the pricing and negotiating part of the car buying process. And here's where the data gets a little more disturbing and annoying, at least to me. Women pay on average $1,000 more for the exact same car than men do. This is partly the dealer's fault and it's partly the consumer's fault. According to the industry data, car dealers on average quote lower initial prices to men than women when they start the negotiating process. So right off the bat, the women are starting out at a higher price tag, usually by anywhere from $200 to $500, sometimes more. So the dealers are starting with a different negotiating strategy depending on whether they're talking to a male customer or a female customer. And this is because they also know the market data that shows that women are twice as less likely to negotiate hard on that pricing than men. And that goes again back to the whole strategy, and kind of psychology of negotiating that I talked about back in that episode 30 with the women don't ask. But women are also more likely by almost twice to say yes to all those extras that they sell you in the finance office, like the extended warranties and the fabric protection, that are very profitable for the dealers because they're so overpriced. So that then jacks up the end price that the women end up paying because they've said yes to some of these things in the finance office that maybe they needed, maybe they didn't. Now, you can argue, and a lot of my mom clients will argue, that they have gotten every bit of their money's worth out of that fabric protection with their kids spilling stuff in the car. So again, if you're getting value for your money, go for it. But we do just on average spend $1,000 more per car than men do. Now, on the other side, men end up paying about $15,000 more for car insurance over their lifetime because their insurance rates are higher than women. So they lose their money on that end of the car buying and car ownership process. So maybe it works out. But, both women and men have their strengths and their weaknesses in their car buying approaches, as well as just differences in their priorities and what's important to them and what they want and where they place value in a vehicle. Men are more emotional in their choice, but when it comes time to sit down at the negotiating table and work out the numbers, they're more likely to push those emotions aside and just be very black and white with the numbers. And even if they've spent, 2-3 hours with this car salesman and have developed a rapport, they have no problem getting up from the negotiating table and walking away. No hard feelings, but the numbers didn't come together. See ya. Whereas women tend to feel a little more guilty about that. We feel, I should buy from them. I owe them something because they've spent time with me. Because we bring some of our fears and some of our hangups about relationships to the negotiating table. We may be more measured and more logical and diligent in our research and in making our decisions, but when we bring our fears and that lack of confidence and some of those emotions to the negotiating table, then we are not doing ourselves any favors. And that's where we can tend to lose money. I hope that some of this information and this data is helpful to you in making your own car buying decisions and helping you to maybe identify what are your individual strengths and challenges and just buying style and preferences when you go to buy a new car. Hopefully, some of this information will help you to make the best decision for yourself and negotiate the best deal for yourself the next time you're in the market for a new car. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. I am out of here. Drive safely.
The Straight Shift podcast is copyright Leanne Shattuck, The Car Chick, 2017. All views expressed by guest and or co-hosts are those of the guest and or co-hosts, and not necessarily those of Leanne Shattuck or The Car Chick.